Hi, welcome to Read to Me. Today I'll be reading chapters 3 and 4 of R.L. Stine's The Fear Street Saga, Book 1, The Betrayal. Chapter 3. Edward's dark eyes grew wide with fear. He grasped Susanna's hand tightly. They listened, frozen together in the dark woods, as if they'd been turned to stone. The voices rose, carried by the wind. Chanting voices. "Burn the witch! Burn the witch! Burn the witch!" "Oh," Susanna gasped. The chanting voices weren't coming from nearby. The wind was carrying the sound from the commons. "There is no one here," Edward said, smiling with relief. "Poor Abigail Hopping," Susanna whispered. "If she is a witch, she must face the fire," Edward replied, still holding Susanna's hand. Susanna rested her head against his shoulder. "We should get back. I went out for firewood. I should have been home. My mother will think the evil one has taken me." "You go first," he told her. "I will wait here a while before I return." "Are you going to tell your father about us?" Susanna asked eagerly. "Yes," Edward told her, "when the time is right." She leaned forward and kissed him again. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to go back to her tiny dark house. She didn't want to return to all the anger and fear of the village. Edward gave her a gentle push, his hands on her shoulders. "Go." She forced a smile, then turned and ran off, pulling on the cap and covering her hair. "We're going to be married," she thought, her heart pounding. "Edward and I are going to be married. I'm going to be the wife of Edward Fire." She felt as if she were floating through the trees. Susanna ran past the woodpile and through the commons, and was nearly home before she remembered she had come out for firewood, and had to go back. "The carrots are small but sweet," William Good said. He sat stiffly at the head of the table, rubbing the gravy off the wooden plate with a biscuit. Susanna watched her father eat his dinner. He looked tired to her, tired and old. He was not yet 40, yet his face was lined and his once blonde hair had turned prematurely white. "Susanna baked the biscuits," Martha Good said. "Would you like more gravy, Father?" Susanna asked, gesturing to the gravy pot still simmering on the hearth. "There are more boiled carrots, too." "I'm going to mash some carrots and give them to George when he wakes up," Susanna's mother said. "I do not know why our carrots are so small," Mr. Good grumbled. "Matthew Fire's carrots are as long as candles." "Why do you not ask him his secret?" Susanna's mother suggested. William Good scowled. He narrowed his gray-green eyes at his wife. "Matthew Fire has no farming skills that I do not have. He has no secrets that The Fires have plenty of secrets," his wife interrupted. "Who are they?" "These Fire brothers. Where do they come from? They did not come to the New World from England as we did." "I do not know," Mr. Good replied thoughtfully. "They come from a small farm village, that is all I know. They were poor when they arrived, both Fire brothers and their wives, but they have prospered here, and that proves they are pious folk, favored by the Maker." His wife sighed. "These carrots are sweet enough, William. I do not intend to hurt your feelings." William Good frowned. "Sweet enough," he muttered. "Help me clear the table, Susanna," Martha Good ordered. "Why are you sitting there with that dazed, faraway expression on your face?" "Sorry, Mother." Susanna started to get up, but her father placed a hand on her arm to restrain her. "Susanna will clear the table in a little while," he told his wife. "I wish to speak with her first." He stood up, pulled a clay pipe down from his pipe rack, filled it with tobacco from his cloth pouch, and went over to the fire to light it. Susanna turned in her chair, her eyes trained on her father, trying to read his expression. "What did you wish to speak to me about, Father?" "About Edward Fire," he replied, frowning as he puffed hard to start the tobacco burning. Susanna gasped. She'd never discussed Edward with either of her parents. She and Edward were merely acquaintances as far as her parents knew. Holding the long white pipe by the bowl, Mr. Good made his way back to the dinner table. He pulled back the stool next to Susanna's and sat down stiffly. What about him?" Susanna stammered, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. Her father leaned close to her. Pipe smoke rose up in front of him, encircling them both in a fragrant cloud. "You and Edward Fire have been seen walking together," he accused. "Walking together without a chaperone present." Susanna's mouth dropped open. She took a deep breath. then started to speak, but no sound came out. "Do you deny it, daughter?" Her father's white eyebrows arched over his gray-green eyes, which burned accusations into hers. "Do you deny it?" "No, father," Susanna replied softly. "No, father," Susanna replied softly. "You were seen in the woods together," her father continued sternly. He held the pipe close to his face, but didn't smoke it. "Yes, father," Susanna muttered, her heart thudding in her chest. Then the words just burst out of her. She had been longing to tell her parents. Now she could hold back the news no longer. "Edward and I are in love," she cried. "He wants to marry me. Is that not wonderful?" Her mother turned from the hearth, her eyes wide with surprise. William Good's face reddened. He lowered his pipe to the table. "Daughter, have you lost your senses? Are you living in a world of dreams?" Susanna gaped at him. "Didn't you hear me, father? Edward wants to marry me!" Her father shut his eyes. He cleared his throat loudly. The pipe trembled in his hand. "You cannot marry Edward Fire," he said quietly. "What are you saying?" Susanna whispered. "Why can't I?" "Because Edward Fire is already betrothed," Mr. Good replied flatly. "What?" "Edward Fire is engaged to be married," her father said. "Edward is to marry a young woman of Portsmouth. His father told me this morning. Chapter 4. The hearth fire flickered low. Long shadows slipped across the floor in her sleeping alcove. Huddled under an old feathered quilt, Susanna turned her face to the wall. How could Edward be so cruel? She asked herself for the 1000th time. How could he lead me to believe that he cared for me, that he loved me? Susanna pressed her face into the pillow to muffle her sobs. She had gone to bed early, hoping her parents wouldn't see how upset she was. Hours had passed now. A pale half-moon was high in the late night sky, and Susanna was still wide awake, still tossing in her narrow bed, crying softly and thinking about Edward with anger and disbelief. I trusted Edward, she thought. I believed everything he said. I risked my reputation for him. And all the while he was engaged to another girl. Breathing hard, Susanna rolled over and stared at the glowing embers in the fireplace across the room. Her secret meetings with Edward Fire rolled through her mind. She remembered his words, his touch, his kisses. Edward always seemed trustworthy, she thought, miserably. So honest and upright. So good. Susanna kicked off the quilt and pushed at the pillow, punching it with both hands. I will never trust anyone again, she told herself bitterly. Never! Across the commons, firelight blazed in the windows of Benjamin Fire's 2-story house. In the dining room, Benjamin was standing at one end of the oak table, gripping the back of a hand-carved chair. Benjamin's son Edward glared at him defiantly from the other end of the table. Benjamin was big and broad-shouldered, an imposing man who looked as if he could wrestle a bull and win. He had straight black hair that fell below his ears and bushy black eyebrows over small dark eyes that seemed to be able to pierce through anything. Benjamin's face was red and almost always set in a hard frown. He was so powerful in appearance, his expression so angry, that most people in Wickham were afraid of him, which didn't displease him in the least. Standing with his back to the fire, Benjamin unfastened the long row of brass buttons down the front of his black doublet, his dark eyes studying Edward. I will not obey you, father, Edward insisted, his voice trembling. He had never defied his father. He knew it was wrong. Benjamin stared across the table, his features set. He didn't reply. I cannot obey you, father, Edward said when his father did not reply. I will not marry Anne Ward. Edward gripped the back of the chair. He hoped his father could not see his trembling knees. You will marry the girl in the autumn, Benjamin said in his deep baritone. I have arranged the marriage with her father. He turned away from Edward to indicate that the discussion had ended. Picking up a poker, he jabbed at the logs in the fireplace, sending a shower of sparks flying up the brick chimney. Edward swallowed hard. Can I do this? He asked himself. Can I stand up to my father? Am I strong enough? Another question nagged at Edward as he struggled to find words. Is it right to argue with my father? Is it not my duty to obey his wishes? No, Edward answered his own question. I love Susanna good. I will marry Susanna and no one else. I cannot obey my father's wishes this time. I will not. Edward took a deep breath. Sir, he called, causing Benjamin to turn away from the fire. I cannot marry Anne Ward. I do not know her. She's a stranger. You will become acquainted with her after the wedding, Benjamin said sternly. It is a very fortunate arrangement for us. This is not fortunate for me, Edward declared heatedly. Do not raise your voice to me, Edward, Benjamin warned, his face a dark crimson. He raised the fireplace poker and pointed it at his son. Anne Ward is an excellent match for you. But I do not know her, father. I do not love her, Edward cried shrilly. Love? Benjamin tossed his head back and laughed. Ha! Edward, we did not come to these colonies for love. My brother Matthew and I did not leave our village for love. We came here to succeed. We came here to escape the poverty of our lives, to escape it forever. I know, father, Edward sighed, sighing, but do you know how poor our family was in the old country? Benjamin demanded, setting down the heavy iron poker and returning to the table. His eyes burned into Edward's, hotter than the fireplace flames. Do you know how poor Matthew and I were? We ate rats to survive, Edward. I know, sir, Edward tried to interrupt. He had heard this speech before. Many was the night we huddled together to keep warm, Benjamin continued. We had no fire, no blankets. Edward lowered his gaze to the floor. He held his breath, waiting for his chance to speak. We came to the New World to succeed, Edward. Not just to succeed, but to prosper. You have done well, sir, Edward broke in. You are the respected magistrate of Wickham, and Uncle Matthew's farm is the most— We can do better! Benjamin exploded, slamming his fist onto the tabletop. Your marriage to Anne Ward will help us do better, Edward. Why, father? I don't see— August Ward is the tea importer for Portsmouth, Benjamin explained, lowering his voice. It has made him a very wealthy man. As his son-in-law, he will become a tea importer too. You will share his wealth. No, father, Edward shook his head. I cannot. I will not. You will, his father insisted sternly. You must marry Anne Ward's daughter. I cannot, father. I am in love with someone else. The words burst out of Edward's mouth before he could stop them. He gasped, realizing what he had revealed. For a brief moment, Benjamin's eyes widened with surprise. Then his expression quickly darkened. In love? He asked, his voice rising sarcastically. With whom? He made his way down the long table to confront his son. With whom? He demanded again, bringing his face a few inches from Edward's. Susanna Good, Edward replied weakly. He cleared his throat and tried to avoid his father's harsh stare. Benjamin hesitated, stunned. Then he closed his eyes and began to laugh. Scornful laughter. Do not laugh, sir, Edward stammered. I am in love with Susanna Good, and I wish to marry her. Benjamin Fire shook his head, his smile lingering. William Good owns 2 scrawny chickens and 2 cows. His daughter is not a match for you, my son. Edward took a deep breath, trying to calm his pounding heart. In his 17 years, he had never argued with his father, never dared to disagree with him. Please, he prayed silently, give me the strength to stand up to my father now. I know I am right. I know I cannot betray Susanna. Please give me the strength. Sir, Edward began, Susanna is a pious girl. She is the girl I will marry. I cannot marry a girl for her wealth. I must marry for love. Benjamin closed his eyes. A log cracked loudly in the fireplace. The floorboards creaked as Benjamin shifted his weight. He sighed wearily. Your engagement to Anne Ward is arranged. We will travel to Portsmouth in the autumn for your wedding. I wish your mother Margaret, bless her soul, were alive to see you wed so profitably. No! Edward cried. No, father! He could feel his anger rise, feel the heat of it in his chest, feel himself losing control for the first time in his life. I have always obeyed you, sir. I know you are a wise, honorable man, but this is my life, Edward screamed, his hands balled into fists at his waist. It is my life, and I will marry Susanna Good. I will marry her even if we have to run away to do it. Edward turned from his father and ran from the room. I did it, he thought, relief mixing with his anger as he made his way to his bedroom. I said what I had to say. I stood up to my father. Back in the narrow dining room, Benjamin Farr slumped heavily into a chair. He fingered the shiny buttons of his doublet as he stared thoughtfully into the fire. Before long, a dark smile spread over the man's ruddy face. I am sorry, Edward, my poor, confused son, he said, grinning into the leaping flames. You will never marry Susanna Good. Alright, that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. And right here, you can click and subscribe for more. And right here, there will be a video that YouTube has suggested for you from my channel. And down in the comments, tell me what you thought. Tell me how I could improve, I guess. And tell me any books you'd like me to read, if you want. They have suggestions. Alright, bye my bookworms!